A battlefield in the Holy Land and a silk workshop in China were connected by an invisible thread. This is the hidden history of the Crusades, a story not of faith alone, but of a vast economic network that bound east to west. We know the tales of knights and siege engines, but the most enduring legacy was written in trade through two powerful commodities, silk and steel. Why would a noblewoman in a Crusader city crave fabric from the other side of the world? How did a sword forged in Persia become a knight's most prized possession? By the end of this journey, you will see the medieval world as a connected, globalized space, long before the age of exploration. What does it truly mean when commerce becomes the real crusade? A noble in Paris might have heard tales of shimmering fabrics and exotic spices, but to actually possess them was a fantasy. Europe at the dawn of the Crusades was an economic island, isolated from the vibrant trade networks of the East. The Byzantine Empire, with its magnificent capital of Constantinople, guarded the overland routes with the possessiveness of a dragon hoarding gold. They taxed goods heavily and controlled the flow, ensuring that only a trickle of the most expensive items reached the West. Further east, the vast realms of the Islamic caliphates held a monopoly on the legendary Silk Roads, the intricate web of pathways that crossed the deserts and mountains of Central Asia. For a bolt of Chinese silk to reach a European court, it had to pass through countless hands, each taking a profit, making the final cost astronomical. This was a fragmented world where distance and middlemen created immense barriers. A piece of silk was not just fabric, it was a tangible piece of a far-off legend, a symbol of status so profound it was almost mythical. The very rarity of these goods fueled an intense desire, a deep-seated yearning for direct access to the source. This economic isolation was the backdrop against which the armies of the First Crusade marched. Their initial goal was spiritual, but their lasting impact would be commercial. The sudden, violent establishment of Christian kingdoms along the coast of the Levant did more than just capture territory, it smashed the old gates. Almost overnight, these new Crusader states became a permanent European foothold in the heart of the world's most lucrative trade routes. The stage was now set not just for continued conflict, but for a revolution in global commerce, where the flow of merchants would prove far more enduring than the march of knights. In the bustling market of Acre, that same silk represented something more than just wealth. It was a form of communication. A noblewoman's choice of a specific shade of crimson or a pattern of golden phoenixes spoke a silent language of power and connection that everyone understood. This demand for the finest silks created an economic gravity, pulling merchants from the farthest corners of Asia directly to the shores of the Levant. These traders were not soldiers, they were the true bridge builders, caravans organized by Sogdian merchants, renowned as the masters of the Central Asian routes, would carry the precious fabric thousands of miles, navigating deserts and mountain passes. Persian middlemen would then broker deals in vibrant bazaars, and Arab sailors would finally transport the goods across the Mediterranean. Each bolt of silk that arrived in a Crusader city had already passed through a dozen cultures, a testament to a network that operated parallel to the fighting. This intricate chain transformed the Crusader states into a bustling commercial hub, where the same lords who fought battles on Tuesday might negotiate trade agreements on Wednesday. Silk became a tool of statecraft, gifted between Frankish kings and Muslim emirs to seal fragile truces. It was woven into the very vestments of priests in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a shimmering symbol of divine splendor that ironically hailed from a non-Christian world. This relentless economic pull, this desire for a beautiful, sensuous fabric, did more than just fill coffers. It wove a fragile but resilient thread of mutual interest between East and West, proving that commerce could build bridges where war only built walls. That same knight, whose armor was a statement of faith, held in his hands a weapon that was a testament to global trade. The legendary Damascus steel sword was more than just a tool for battle. It was a masterpiece of engineering that Europe simply could not replicate. Its secret lay not in the forges of Syria, but in the distant mines of India and Persia, where a unique type of iron ore was smelted into ingots known as Wootz steel. These raw metal cakes, with their distinctive crystalline structure, were the starting point for a weapon of almost mythical quality. Imagine the skill required to transform that raw material into a blade featuring the iconic watery pattern, a surface that rippled like a stream. This visual hallmark was more than decoration. It was proof of an internal structure that gave the steel an incredible combination of hardness and flexibility. A sword that could hold a devastating edge without becoming brittle was the difference between life and death on the battlefield. Chronicles from the era speak in awe of its capabilities, claiming it could slice a silk handkerchief floating in the air or even cleave through a lesser sword. For a Crusader knight, possessing such a weapon was not just an advantage, it was the ultimate status symbol, a physical embodiment of martial prowess. This powerful demand created a specialized economy within the Crusader States themselves. While the prized Wootz ingots traveled thousands of miles along trade routes, the knowledge of how to work them was already present. Local Armenian and Syrian smiths, who had preserved and perfected these metallurgical techniques for generations, found a new clientele in their Frankish rulers. These craftsmen became essential, their workshops serving as armories where the legendary blades were maintained, repaired, and sometimes even fashioned for the elite. So, while the silk scarf symbolized wealth and diplomacy, the sword that could cut it represented a different kind of connection, a relentless pursuit of technological superiority that linked the forges of Damascus directly to the mines of Asia. This quest for the perfect weapon wove another, stronger thread into the economic tapestry, binding the fate of warriors in the Holy Land to the ancient industrial secrets of the East. While the knight's Damascus steel blade was a marvel, its journey to his hand was an epic in itself, traversing the most rugged geography on Earth. The legendary Silk Road was not one single highway but a sprawling network of arteries, and one of its most vital branches ran directly through the lands surrounding the Crusader States. From the bustling markets of Aleppo and Damascus, caravan trails stretched east, connecting to the immense commercial hub of Baghdad. From there, the routes continued, a chain of cities and caravanserais leading through Persia and Afghanistan, all the way to the distant workshops of China. This was the Southern Silk Road in action, a lifeline of commerce that made the Crusader ports the final destination for a river of goods flowing from the heart of Asia. Navigating this complex web required more than just camels and courage. It demanded cultural fluency. Armenian merchants emerged as the masters of this domain. Their long-standing communities were spread across the region, allowing them to act as neutral intermediaries. A merchant from Armenia could negotiate with a Frankish lord in the morning and a Muslim emir in the afternoon, his credibility resting on a reputation for fairness that transcended the ongoing conflict. They were the essential human link, transporting silk, spices, and precious stones across seemingly impassable political and religious boundaries. But this was no easy trek. A caravan faced countless dangers, from bands of opportunistic raiders to the ever-present threat of a local alliance collapsing and closing a route without warning. Then there was the land itself, the brutal, unyielding challenge of crossing mountains and deserts. Every mile traveled, every hardship endured, was woven into the value of the goods. A bolt of silk was not expensive merely because of its beauty, but because it had survived a journey that many merchants did not. This meant the very survival of the Crusader States, dependent on the taxes and wealth from this trade, was inextricably linked to the security of caravan trails thousands of miles away. The fate of a kingdom in the Holy Land could be decided by the safety of a remote mountain pass in Persia, a fragile connection of silk and steel stretching across the world. The air in the port of Acre was thick with the scent of salt, spices, and a dozen different tongues. Here, the creaking galleys of Venice and Genoa rubbed hulls with the elegant lateen sails of Arab dhows, a floating forest of masts that connected continents. While the overland caravans were vital, the true lifeblood of this global exchange often arrived by sea. This was the maritime Silk Road, a watery highway that channeled the immense wealth of the Indian Ocean directly to the doorstep of the Crusader kingdoms. Ships brought not just silk but sacks of pungent black pepper from the Malabar coast, gleaming pearls from the Persian Gulf, and radiant gems from Indian mines. This torrent of luxury began its long journey in the east, sailed up the Red Sea on the seasonal monsoon winds, and was then hauled overland to Egyptian ports like Idhab before finally reaching the Mediterranean. The sheer volume and value of these goods made the sea routes the ultimate prize, and waiting to claim it were the shrewd merchants of the Italian maritime republics. Venice and Genoa, with their powerful navies and commercial ambition, masterfully played all sides. They secured exclusive trade treaties with the Crusader States while simultaneously negotiating lucrative deals with their Ayyubid rivals in Egypt and Syria. This created a startling reality on the ground. An Italian merchant house could, in the very same season, supply timber to a Frankish castle, while also providing the very same Ayyubid sultan with strategic goods like iron. Their loyalty was not to a crown or a cross, but to the ledger. This complex triangle of trade and diplomacy created a web of economic interdependence that profoundly complicated the era's religious conflicts. A sultan might be preparing for war against the Crusaders while his treasury depended on the taxes from trade those very same Italians facilitated. The flow of spices and pearls across the sea did more than just enrich merchants. It forced a kind of pragmatic peace, creating a world where the relentless pursuit of profit became a quiet, powerful force for connection in an age of division. But for all the bustle of the Italian wharves, the true journey of these goods often began far from the sea, in the shadow of a different imperial city. Constantinople stood as a colossal, golden gate between two worlds. For centuries, this capital of the Byzantine Empire had been the unrivaled terminus of the Silk Road in the west, its markets overflowing with the treasures of Asia. The emperors in their palaces understood that this flow of commerce was the very lifeblood of their state, and they controlled it with meticulous care. Every bale of silk, every ingot of steel that passed through its gates was heavily taxed, filling the imperial treasury and reinforcing Byzantine power. This was a system that had worked for generations, a carefully managed monopoly where Constantinople was the indispensable middleman. Then came the Crusaders. These European knights and their new kingdoms represented a profound challenge to this ancient order. Their relationship with Byzantium was famously tense, a mix of shaky alliance and deep-seated suspicion. The Byzantine emperors watched with alarm as these new states on their southern flank began to establish their own direct commercial links with the East, bypassing the traditional routes that fed their own wealth. This friction forced trade to adapt, to seek new paths. Armenian Cilicia, to the northeast of the Crusader States, became a vital new corridor. The Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, in the heart of Anatolia, also emerged as a key transit route, its rulers happy to profit from caravans that might once have gone exclusively through Byzantine lands. So the Byzantine Empire played a deeply contradictory role. It was still a massive, often unavoidable gateway for luxuries, but its very presence and policies now pushed commerce onto alternate trails. The delicate diplomatic dance between the emperor in Constantinople, the Frankish kings in Jerusalem, and the various Muslim sultans was not just about military alliances or truces. Every treaty, every marriage pact, every subtle shift in political winds had a direct and immediate impact on the price of silk in Acre or the availability of a Damascus steel sword. The flow of commerce, therefore, became a barometer of political stability, its currents shifting with the rise and fall of empires, all orchestrated from that golden city on the Bosphorus. The power of the Seljuk Turks was etched into the very landscape they commanded. From their strongholds on the Anatolian plateau, they presided over the world's greatest land bridge, a sprawling highland that connected the markets of Europe directly to the heart of Asia. Any caravan traveling from Constantinople to the riches of Persia or beyond had to navigate this Seljuk domain. They were far more than just obstacles on the map, however. The Seljuks were master architects of commerce, and their most enduring legacy was a chain of caravanserais that stretched across their realm. Imagine one of these fortified inns appearing on the horizon after a long, dusty day's journey. Its high walls promised safety from bandits, its stables offered rest for weary camels, and its storerooms provided a secure place for precious goods. A merchant could find food, water, and a place to sleep, all protected by the local emir's guarantee of safe passage. This was not mere hospitality. It was a sophisticated economic policy designed to attract the lifeblood of trade and tax it efficiently. By making the journey safer and more predictable, the Seljuks ensured that the lucrative flow of goods would continue through their territory, filling their own treasuries. This created a remarkable reality on the ground. Even as grand armies of Crusaders and Seljuk sultans clashed in famous battles, the local exchanges between Frankish counts and Seljuk emirs often told a different story. A fragile truce might be negotiated not for peace, but to ensure the seasonal caravan could pass unmolested. A local lord understood that taxing the merchants bringing silk and steel was far more profitable than looting them. This was the fascinating paradox of war and trade existing side by side. Hostilities at the highest level of kings and sultans did not necessarily stop the daily business of commerce at the local level. The Seljuk realm, therefore, became a crucial filter for the entire system. They decided which routes were safest, which goods were most valuable, and which cultural influences, from architectural styles to new technologies, would travel west with the caravans. Their network of caravanserais did more than shelter merchants. It wove a thread of stability through the rugged highlands, ensuring that the economic pulse of silk and steel continued to beat, even in an age of conflict. A sultan in Cairo could hold the wealth of the East in the palm of his hand. To the south of the Crusader kingdoms, the rulers of Egypt, first the Fatimid caliphs and later Saladin's Ayyubid dynasty, commanded the world's most vital commercial artery, the maritime Silk Road flowing from the Indian Ocean into the Red Sea. This was not merely a trade route, it was a financial lifeline. Spices from India, silks from China, and pearls from the Gulf all had to pass through Egyptian ports like Idhab and Qusair. From there, these precious goods were transported overland to the Nile, and then north to the great Mediterranean ports of Alexandria and Damietta. This control over the choke point of Eastern luxuries made Egypt phenomenally wealthy, its treasuries overflowing with the profits of a near-total monopoly. For the Italian merchants in Acre and Tyre, this presented an incredible dilemma. Egypt was their greatest commercial rival, the source of the very goods they craved, yet it was also the sworn enemy of the Crusader States they nominally supported. This tension created a reality on the ground that defied simple labels of friend and foe. Despite being arch-military adversaries, the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the powers in Cairo maintained a complex, often shockingly pragmatic relationship. Elaborate truces were negotiated, not just for breathing space between battles, but to ensure that caravans could move and markets could function. The ransoming of captured knights became a sophisticated business transaction, where the price was often paid in gold that had itself come from the spice trade. Both sides recognized a profound truth, that a complete economic rupture would be a disaster for everyone. The Frankish nobility depended on the luxuries that passed through Egypt to maintain their status, and the Egyptian treasury relied on the taxes from goods ultimately destined for European markets. This created an uneasy commercial peace, a space where the relentless desire for silk and spices could, and frequently did, override the fervor of both jihad and crusade. It was a quiet acknowledgement that some connections are too profitable to sever, proving that even in an age defined by faith, the power of commerce could write its own enduring rules. The ledgers of Venice and Genoa held more power than any single battlefield victory. These Italian merchant republics were the invisible architects of the entire Crusader economy, building a financial bridge that carried the riches of the East directly into the coffers of Europe. They provided the essential service no one else could, a fleet of reliable, armed merchant galleys that transformed the treacherous Mediterranean into a commercial highway. Their ships became the vital link, the only way to get the silks and spices accumulating in Acre and Tyre to the eager, wealthy buyers in cities like Florence and Paris. This was not a charitable operation, it was a ruthlessly efficient machine designed for one purpose: profit. To secure their dominance, they negotiated extraordinary privileges from the Crusader kings, who were often desperate for naval support and cash. In the heart of ports like Acre, entire districts fell under the control of Venice or Genoa. These were extraterritorial quarters, sovereign islands governed by their own laws and judges, where the flag of the merchant republic flew higher than that of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Within these fortified compounds, warehouses bulged with goods, and scribes meticulously recorded transactions in a complex web of credit and debt that stretched back to Italy. The rivalry between these states was ferocious, a cold war that frequently turned hot. The streets of Acre sometimes ran with blood not from a Muslim assault, but from clashes between Venetian and Genoese merchants fighting over a lucrative trade contract or control of a key wharf. Their competition was the engine that drove the entire system, pushing them to seek ever more direct access to the sources of silk and spices, often dealing with the very powers their Crusader allies were fighting. They were the ultimate pragmatists in an age of fervent belief, proving that the most enduring structures built during the Crusades were not castles, but the relentless, profit-driven networks of global commerce. A gift of silk could speak louder than a declaration of war. In the courts of both Crusader kings and Muslim sultans, the exchange of luxury goods was a sophisticated language of diplomacy, a quiet acknowledgement that prosperity often trumped ideology. When a truce was negotiated after a long siege, the terms were not solely about the disposition of castles or prisoners. They almost always contained explicit guarantees for the safety of merchants and the reopening of specific trade routes. Both sides understood that their treasuries and the loyalty of their own elites depended on a steady flow of silks and spices. To halt commerce was to strangle their own kingdoms. This created a fascinating layer of pragmatic statecraft that operated just beneath the surface of holy war. A chronicler might note that the Sultan of Egypt sent a delegation to the King of Jerusalem, bearing gifts of the finest Damascus steel swords and bolts of Chinese silk. This was not a sign of weakness or friendship in the modern sense, but a ritualized recognition of a shared culture of power. Both rulers, despite their profound religious differences, belonged to a warrior aristocracy that valued the same symbols of status and martial excellence. The gift of a magnificent sword was an acknowledgement of the other's military prowess, while the silk affirmed their mutual refinement and right to rule. These exchanges wove a thin but vital thread of mutual interest between the highest levels of society. They created a vested interest in maintaining at least a baseline of stability, a commercial peace that could survive the rhetoric of preachers and the passions of the battlefield. The frontiers of the Crusader States, therefore, were never solid walls of conflict. They were more like a sieve, a permeable membrane through which not just goods, but ideas, artistic styles, and technological knowledge constantly passed back and forth. This relentless flow ensured that even in an age defined by faith, the marketplace could sometimes quiet the call to arms. A merchant might believe he was trading in spices, but he was really trafficking in ideas. The bustling ports and caravan stops of the Levant became the world's most dynamic university, where the curriculum was exchanged not in lecture halls but through the casual conversations of traders, the shared workspace of artisans, and the multilingual haggling in a bazaar. The most profound cargo carried on those ships was not silk but knowledge. European medicine, for instance, was still deeply rooted in ancient, often flawed theories. Through contact with the East, scholars gained access to a vast library of Arabic medical texts. These works were not purely Arab inventions. They were themselves repositories of Greek wisdom preserved and expanded upon, combined with advanced medical insights from Persia, India, and even China. Suddenly, European physicians could study detailed anatomical diagrams and sophisticated explanations of disease that were centuries ahead of their own. This was a quiet revolution, one that would eventually save countless lives and reshape Western science. The same routes that delivered silk also delivered the very numerals we use today. The Hindu-Arabic numeral system, with its revolutionary concept of zero and place value, began to slowly replace the cumbersome Roman numerals, making complex calculation and advanced bookkeeping possible. This mathematical leap was the hidden engine behind the later commercial and scientific revolutions in Europe. Look beyond the market stalls and into the stonework of the Crusader castles themselves. The stark military architecture of the Franks began to incorporate graceful, pointed arches and intricate stone filigree inspired by Islamic design. In the churches of the Crusader States, you can find marble inlays and decorative patterns that echo the geometric artistry of nearby mosques, a visual fusion that speaks of craftsmen learning from one another, sharing techniques that transcended the language of faith. Even the European dinner table was transformed. The bitter hardship of a long campaign was sweetened by the discovery of sugar, cultivated in the fields of the Levant. Lemons and oranges, once exotic novelties, became cherished additions to the European pantry, alongside spices like pepper and cinnamon that would soon define an entire age of exploration. This was the true, unbreakable connection forged by trade. While kingdoms rose and fell, this silent, relentless exchange of knowledge, art, and flavor wove the Eastern and Western worlds together, creating a shared cultural legacy far more permanent than any border drawn by a sword. The true strength of a Crusader kingdom was measured not in the height of its walls but in the depth of its treasury. Maintaining a foothold in the Levant was an enterprise of staggering cost. Every stone for a fortress, every link of mail for a knight, every pound of grain for a garrison had to be paid for, and the initial flow of silver from Europe was never enough. The survival of these states hinged on their ability to generate wealth internally, and they found their financial salvation in the very trade they had come to dominate. The bustling ports of Acre and Tyre became more than commercial hubs. They were the beating hearts of the kingdom, with customs houses acting as the vital valves. Every bale of silk, every sack of pepper that was unloaded onto the wharves was taxed, with the revenue flowing directly into the royal coffers. This steady stream of gold and silver was the economic lifeblood that paid for the iconic castles we marvel at today. The formidable Crac des Chevaliers, whose sheer walls seemed to grow from the mountain itself, was not just a feat of military engineering, it was a monument financed by pepper and silk. The salaries of the knights who manned its battlements, the sergeants who patrolled its corridors, and the craftsmen who maintained its defenses were all covered by the taxes on trade. This created a profound and constant tension at the core of the Crusader project. The stated purpose of these states was perpetual religious war, a holy struggle against their Muslim neighbors. Yet their financial survival demanded the exact opposite: peace and stability. A broken truce or a closed caravan route meant an immediate drop in royal revenue, threatening the ability to pay soldiers and maintain defenses. This economic reality forced the Frankish nobility into a daily practice of pragmatic, often cynical, diplomacy. The same baron who pledged to reclaim Jerusalem for Christendom might, in the very same week, be negotiating a lucrative trade agreement with a local emir to ensure the safe passage of goods. Their 2-century-long presence in the Levant was defined by this delicate balancing act, a continuous struggle to reconcile the demands of faith with the undeniable necessities of commerce. That Damascus steel blade was more than a status symbol, it was a battlefield reality that reshaped European warfare. When a knight's trusted mail coat, a heavy garment of interlocking iron rings, could be pierced by a well-struck arrow or sliced by a rival sword, it sparked an arms race of survival. The immediate response was to add reinforcement, strapping solid plates of steel over the most vulnerable parts of the body. First came the knee cops and shoulder guards, then breastplates and arm defenses, evolving over generations into the iconic, head-to-toe suit of plate armor we associate with the later medieval period. This was a direct, pragmatic reaction to the superior metalworking of their opponents. The knowledge of how to create such resilient steel did not remain a secret for long. In the workshops of the Crusader States, Frankish and local Armenian smiths worked side by side, maintaining and repairing the very weapons that threatened their lords. Through this daily collaboration, techniques were observed, questions were asked, and skills were shared. Some Muslim master smiths, their services highly valued, may have been persuaded to continue their craft under new patronage. Slowly, this hard-won metallurgical knowledge began the long journey back to the forges of Europe, carried in the minds of returning knights and craftsmen, planting the seeds for a revolution in European metalworking. Yet this exchange was not a one-way street. The Crusaders themselves introduced new forms of military architecture and siege engineering to the region, their formidable castles incorporating design elements that local builders then studied and adapted. The battlefield became a brutal, high-stakes laboratory where the quality of a single sword could decide a man's fate. This relentless pressure accelerated a silent exchange of martial knowledge, proving that in the clash of empires, the most enduring lessons were often written in steel. A noblewoman's gown in the court of Acre was a statement written in shimmering thread. In the complex social world of the Crusader States, silk was a visual language instantly understood by everyone, a clear marker separating the established elite from the newly arrived knights from Europe. These Frankish nobles who had put down roots in the Levant, began to adopt the flowing robes and intricate silks of the East, not merely for comfort but as a deliberate signal of their transformation. They were no longer temporary visitors on a sacred campaign. They were rulers of a sophisticated cross-cultural society, and their clothing proclaimed this new identity. To wear these luxuries was to announce one's success, permanence, and integration into the refined court life of the region, setting them visibly apart from their more rustic cousins who had just stepped off the boat from the West. This sartorial shift was so powerful that it sparked attempts to control it through sumptuary laws. Both in the Crusader States and back in Europe, authorities tried to legislate who could wear specific colors like deep crimson or certain patterns of silk, restricting these displays to the highest nobility. These laws were a clear admission of silk's potent symbolic power, revealing a fear that this flowing fabric could destabilize the rigid social hierarchies of the medieval world. The very need for such regulations underscores how a simple traded commodity was actively reshaping social identities, weaving new cultural norms into the very fabric of a frontier society where East and West were learning to coexist. The same silk that adorned a noblewoman in Acre covered the altar of the holiest site in Jerusalem. Within the hallowed spaces of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the luxury trade found its ultimate purpose, transforming worldly wealth into an offering of divine splendor. The profound religiosity of the era demanded that the finest materials be used in worship, creating a powerful and constant demand for imported silks and precious metals. Altar cloth shimmered with intricate patterns, and priests wore vestments of dazzling Chinese silk during the most sacred ceremonies. These were not mere decorations, they were considered essential for honoring the divine, a visual representation of heaven's glory here on earth. This created a fascinating theological justification for the entire luxury trade. How could the use of such opulent goods, often crafted by non-Christian hands, be reconciled with the ideals of spiritual purity? The answer lay in the belief that nothing was too beautiful or too costly for the service of God. The origin of the silk mattered less than its destination, its journey from a distant workshop sanctified by its final use in a holy place. This spiritual need for splendor meant that churches and monasteries in the Crusader States became some of the most reliable and prestigious customers for merchants dealing in the finest Eastern goods. The most poignant fusion of faith and commerce was found in the treatment of relics. A fragment of a saint's bone or a piece of the true cross was often encased in a reliquary wrapped in the most exquisite silks from Byzantium or the Islamic world. The spiritual power of the saint was thus physically housed within the material wealth of the global trade network, a tangible link between the divine and the deeply human systems of exchange. This practice blurred the lines between pious devotion and worldly opulence in a uniquely medieval way, sanctifying the very commerce that made such displays possible. The flow of silk into sacred spaces did more than beautify them. It wove the threads of global trade directly into the fabric of faith itself. Then the world shook. In the middle of the 13th century, a storm of conquest swept out of the Central Asian steppes, forging the largest contiguous land empire in human history. The Mongols arrived with terrifying speed, their dominion stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the very doorstep of the Levant. This sudden reconfiguration of the entire Asian map did not destroy the networks of silk and steel, it commandeered them. For the isolated Crusader states clinging to the Mediterranean coast, this presented a breathtaking, if fleeting, opportunity. Crusader kings, most notably Louis IX of France, saw a potential hammer to strike their primary adversaries, the powerful Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. They sent emissaries east, hoping to forge an alliance with these mysterious new power brokers, a Christian and Mongol pincer movement against a common foe. For a moment, it seemed the political stars had aligned. The Mongol Khans, pragmatic rulers who valued talent over theology, enforced a remarkable peace across their vast territories. This Pax Mongolica, as historians would later call it, made the Silk Road safer than it had ever been. Caravans could travel from the Black Sea to the capital of China with a newfound sense of security, their passage guaranteed by the fierce reputation of the Mongol horsemen. It was within this brief window of unprecedented connectivity that a young Venetian merchant named Marco Polo began his legendary journey, his travels a symbol of a world suddenly made smaller and more accessible. The flow of goods, from the finest silks to the most advanced steel, surged along these open arteries, and the Crusader ports buzzed with the possibility of even more direct access to the riches of the Far East. But this hopeful moment was not to last. The geopolitical landscape shifted once more, this time decisively. The Mongols of the Ilkhanate, who ruled Persia, gradually converted to Islam, aligning themselves culturally and religiously with their former enemies. Then, in the year 1260, the Mamluk armies of Egypt achieved a stunning victory against a Mongol force at the Battle of Ain Jalut. This defeat checked the Mongol advance and closed the brief window of cooperation. The dream of a grand alliance evaporated, and the Mongols integrated into the existing Islamic world order. This entire Mongol interlude, though brief, serves as a powerful demonstration of a fundamental truth. The fate of the Crusader States, their wealth, and their very survival were intimately tied to events unfolding thousands of miles away. A decision made in a court in China or a battle fought in Palestine could, in an instant, open or close the vital channels of commerce that sustained their existence, proving that their world was always far more connected than the simple story of a holy war would suggest. The rise of the Mamluks was the final, decisive force that reshaped the map of trade and power. This elite class of slave soldiers, having seized control of Egypt and Syria, represented a new kind of military machine, one whose discipline and unity of purpose made them the most formidable army the region had ever seen. Their systematic campaign to conquer the last Crusader ports was driven by more than just religious fervor or a desire for territory. It was a calculated move to control the economic heart of the Levant. When their forces finally broke through the walls of Acre in 1291, it was not merely the fall of a city, it was the closing of a commercial gateway that had stood for nearly 2 centuries. The Mamluks understood that true power lay not just in winning battles, but in commanding the very routes that carried silk and spices from the east. With the Crusader kingdoms erased from the coast, the Mamluks established an iron grip on the trade networks. They now controlled both the Syrian caravan routes and the Red Sea ports, creating a unified, monopolistic system. The Italian merchants who had once operated from their own fortified quarters in Acre suddenly found themselves on the outside. Their special privileges were gone, their warehouses lost. To continue their business, they now had to negotiate directly with the Mamluk authorities, who held all the leverage. This was a profound power shift. The old model of a European commercial foothold in the Levant was finished. This Mamluk victory forced a desperate yet brilliant adaptation. European kingdoms, still craving the luxuries of the East, could no longer rely on intermediaries in the Crusader States. They were cut off from the source, and the prices dictated from Cairo and Damascus were exorbitant. This economic pressure ignited a new era of thinking. If the land routes through the Middle East were now a Mamluk monopoly, the only solution was to find a way around them. The quest began for a sea route to India, a direct path that would bypass the Middle East entirely. This logistical challenge, born from the collapse of the Crusader world, would ultimately fuel the great voyages of exploration, pushing Portuguese caravels down the coast of Africa and eventually into the Indian Ocean. The Mamluk triumph, therefore, did not sever the connection between East and West. Instead, it snapped one link in the chain, forcing the creation of a new, global one that would forever change the world. How do we know all of this? The grand narrative of silk and steel is not confined to dusty manuscripts. It is etched into the earth itself, waiting for the archaeologist's trowel to reveal its truth. In the ancient ports of Caesarea and Acre, where Italian galleys once docked, excavations have brought up fragments of a world far beyond the Mediterranean. Nestled in the soil are countless shards of Chinese celadon pottery. Their distinctive jade green glaze a silent witness to cargoes that crossed oceans. Each piece of this delicate porcelain, found so far from its home, is a physical data point, undeniable proof that the markets of the Crusader States were directly connected to the kilns of the Far East. This was not a trickle of trade, but a consistent, thriving exchange, with these ceramics serving as the everyday tableware of a cosmopolitan elite. Beyond the bustling ports, within the formidable walls of Crusader castles, another form of evidence emerges from the analysis of ancient forges. Scientific studies of metal artifacts and slag have, in several instances, identified the unique chemical signature of high-carbon steel. This composition is a direct match for the Wootz steel production methods of India and Persia, offering tangible, scientific confirmation for the chronicler's awestruck accounts of legendary blades. The stories of swords that could slice a falling silk scarf were not mere poetic exaggeration. They were descriptions of a superior technology, its physical remnants now confirmed by modern science. Further testament to this exchange of knowledge lies not in artifacts, but in silent, crumbling structures. Across the landscape of the Levant, you can find the remnants of sugar mills. This sweet substance, unknown to European palates before the Crusades, became a major industry. The technology to process sugarcane was a complex one, learned by the Crusaders from their Near Eastern neighbors. They did not just consume this knowledge, they industrialized it, and then transferred the entire operation to new centers like Cyprus and Sicily. These stone ruins are monuments to the transfer of an entire industry, a quiet migration of technology that would eventually reshape agriculture across the Mediterranean. Every broken piece of pottery, every analyzed sliver of metal, and every abandoned millstone forms a collective testimony. Together, they build an incontrovertible case for a deeply interconnected medieval world, proving that the most enduring legacies are often written not in ink, but in clay, iron, and stone. A gold coin from the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem could easily be mistaken for currency from Cairo or Constantinople. This was no accident, but a deliberate and brilliant economic strategy. The Frankish rulers, despite their religious mission, quickly grasped a fundamental truth. Their new kingdoms were embedded within a vast, sophisticated, and predominantly Muslim economic network. To survive, their money needed to be instantly recognizable and trusted across that entire network. So they began minting their own version of the gold dinar, a coin they called the Saracen bezant. These were not just inspired by Islamic and Byzantine coins, they were meticulous copies. Crusader minters replicated the exact weight, the precise purity of gold, and even the elegant Arabic script that proclaimed the oneness of God. For a Christian king to issue a coin bearing the Islamic declaration of faith was a breathtaking act of pragmatism. It meant that a merchant in Damascus or a ship captain in Alexandria would accept this Frankish money without a second thought, its value guaranteed by its perfect conformity to the established standards of the region. The coin became a universal passport for commerce, its inscriptions speaking the language of trade far more loudly than the language of faith. this financial integration is starkly revealed in the archaeological record. When hoards of coins are unearthed from this period, they rarely contain just one type of currency. A single clay pot buried for safekeeping might hold a jumble of Crusader bezants, Byzantine solidi, and Ayyubid dinars, all circulating together as equal partners in daily business. This mixed currency is undeniable proof of a de facto common monetary zone, a seamless financial landscape that paid no heed to the battle lines drawn on maps. The very existence of these hybrid coins tells us that the Frankish elite understood their economic reality with crystal clarity. They were not the center of their own financial universe, but a peripheral player in a much larger, economically dominant Eastern world. Their willingness to adopt the monetary symbols of their rivals reveals a profound and consistent theme: the relentless power of economic necessity to shape human behavior, quietly weaving connections where war had failed to build anything but walls. A European poet who had never left his village could describe a hero's sword with the shimmering pattern of Indian steel. This was the power of the stories that returned from the East, tales that transformed hard-won commercial contacts into a potent and lasting mythology. The travelogues of merchants and pilgrims became the fantasy novels of their day, feeding a continent's hunger for the exotic. No work did this more effectively than the account of Marco Polo. His detailed descriptions of the Mongol court, of cities paved with marble and rivers running with wealth, were not born in a vacuum. They were the ultimate product of the trade routes first stabilized by the Crusader presence, a window into a world that had already been whispering its secrets to the West for 2 centuries. When Polo spoke of the immense wealth of the Great Khan, he was confirming a deep-seated European belief in the almost magical abundance of the Orient, a belief first seeded by the silks and spices that had flowed into Acre. This was not mere reportage, it was the birth of a powerful cultural dream. Back in the great halls of Europe, storytellers and poets wove these exotic materials directly into their epics. A knight in a chanson jest was no longer just brave, he was magnificent, his authority proclaimed by a robe of Tartar silk and his prowess proven by a blade of the finest Eastern steel. These commodities became literary code, a shorthand any listener would understand for unparalleled luxury, martial supremacy, and a connection to a wider, more wondrous world. The fantastical East of these stories, a land of boundless treasure and advanced craftsmanship, was a direct inheritance from the very real, daily commerce of the Crusader States. This cultural memory, forged in literature and travel writing, would prove astonishingly durable. Long after the last Crusader castle had fallen, the dream of that wealthy East persisted. It was this dream, this map drawn by storytellers and merchants, that would ultimately fill the sails of explorers like Columbus and Vasco da Gama. They were not seeking a new world, but a direct path to the old, mythical one they had read about in these very books, a world first connected to their own by the enduring threads of silk and steel. A golden bezant bearing Arabic script might circulate in the markets of Acre, but it did not erase the profound lines of separation that defined life in the Crusader States. The Frankish elite eagerly consumed the luxuries of the East, yet they fiercely protected their distinct Latin Christian identity. They governed their kingdoms not by local customs, but by a legal code imported from the West, the Assizes of Jerusalem. Their most enduring architectural monuments were not hybrid palaces but soaring cathedrals built in the unmistakable Romanesque and Gothic styles of their European homeland. The experience of daily life varied dramatically depending on who you were and where you lived. For a knight residing in a bustling, multicultural port like Acre, life was one of constant cross-cultural exposure. He might don a silk robe for a diplomatic meeting, converse with Armenian merchants, and employ Syrian servants. yet his social world likely remained firmly within the Frankish noble class. For a rural settler farming a plot of land in a more isolated village, the story was entirely different. Their world was far more insular, with limited daily contact with the wider Eastern society and a stronger adherence to the traditions they had brought with them from Europe. This stark contrast highlights a crucial point. The celebrated connections of silk and steel existed alongside persistent social and legal boundaries. Modern historians continue to debate the true depth of this cultural mixing, a process often called acculturation. The old, romantic idea of a perfect East meets West harmony is now seen as a simplification. Instead, we see a society marked by a constant, dynamic tension between adoption and resistance. The Franks were selective borrowers, embracing what was useful or pleasurable in material goods and technology, while often rejecting deeper social or religious integration. They lived in a connected world, but they navigated it with a clear sense of their own separateness. This nuanced reality makes the connection between the Crusader States and the Far East not a story of merger, but one of a continuous, often fraught process of negotiation. It was a world where a shared marketplace did not necessarily mean a shared identity, and where the most profound exchanges were often practical, not personal. The Viking trade routes that snaked through the rivers of Russia formed a very different kind of web. For centuries, Scandinavian traders known as the Rus navigated the Volga and Dnieper, their longships laden with northern luxuries like furs, amber, and wax. Their primary goal was the glittering silver of the Islamic world, millions of dirham coins minted in Baghdad and Central Asia that flowed north in exchange. This was a linear, point-to-point system, a long chain connecting the Baltic Sea to the Caspian, with the great city of Constantinople often serving as the final, magnificent terminus. While the Vikings acquired silks and spices, their network was fundamentally about raw materials flowing south and processed wealth flowing north. It was a remarkable achievement, but it lacked the dense, multipolar complexity of the Crusader world. The Mediterranean and the Levant were a crowded stage. Here, the Crusader states were just one actor among many, forced to constantly negotiate with the Byzantine Empire, the Seljuk Sultanate, and the successive powers of Fatimid and Ayyubid Egypt. This was not a simple trade route, it was a crowded, competitive marketplace of empires. This environment fostered a revolutionary level of commercial sophistication. The Italian merchant republics did not just move goods, they invented new forms of finance, credit, and international contract law to manage the immense risks and rewards. Their operations were an early form of capitalism, far removed from the straightforward barter of the northern routes. The variety of goods was also staggering. While the Viking trade dealt in high-value but limited commodities, the Crusader ports handled an endless stream of diverse cargo. Beyond silk and steel, there were bulk spices like pepper and cinnamon, medicinal drugs, exotic perfumes, and precious stones, creating an economy of both immense luxury and staggering volume. This is why the Crusader connection left such a deep imprint on Western Europe. The Viking silver enriched Scandinavia, but its cultural impact further west was muted. In contrast, the goods and knowledge flowing through Acre and Tyre fundamentally reshaped European life. They altered cuisine with sugar and citrus, revolutionized mathematics with Arabic numerals, advanced medicine, and transformed warfare with new armor and military architecture. The Viking network was a brilliant thread in the medieval tapestry, but the Crusader connection was the loom on which a new, more interconnected world was woven, a pivotal moment that rewired the very circuits of Eurasia and set the stage for the modern era. The shimmering silk and legendary swords came with a hidden debt. one written not in ledgers but on the landscape itself. For every bolt of fabric that reached a Crusader port, countless mulberry trees were felled to feed the insatiable appetite of silkworms. Across China, Persia, and the Byzantine Empire, ancient woodlands gave way to vast monoculture farms dedicated solely to sericulture. This transformation of the land for a single industry altered soil health and displaced native flora, creating an early form of environmental change driven by distant demand. Similarly, the forges that produced the prized Wootz steel burned day and night, their fires fueled by charcoal made from local forests. The quest for the perfect blade led to the gradual depletion of woodlands around industrial centers in India and Central Asia, leaving a lasting mark on the ecosystem. Even the caravans that carried these goods left a footprint. Thousands of camels and horses, the engines of overland trade, required immense tracts of grazing land and placed incredible strain on the scarce water sources of the Central Asian deserts. Oases that sustained entire communities saw their levels drop under the constant demand of the passing trains. This medieval network of trade, for all its economic brilliance, wove a fragile web of ecological consequence. It serves as a powerful early reminder that globalization, even in a pre-industrial age, always extracts a price, connecting the desires of a noble in Acre directly to a receding forest in Persia or a stressed oasis in Samarkand. The story of silk and steel is ultimately a lesson in human connection. It reminds us that history is rarely a simple chronicle of conflict, but a complex tapestry where commerce, culture, and technology intertwine. We have traced this thread from the forges of India to the silk workshops of China, following its path into the vibrant, contentious world of the Crusader Levant. These were not just exotic goods, they were the lifeblood of kingdoms, the catalysts for technological change, and the quiet architects of cultural fusion. They funded the stone giants we call castles, reshaped the very art of war, and subtly altered the flavors on a European dinner plate. The legacy of this medieval globalization is not confined to the past. It lives on in the words we use for numbers, the citrus in our gardens, and the scientific principles that underpin our modern world. This hidden history challenges us to look beyond the familiar narratives of knights and holy war, to see the deeper, more resilient connections that have always bound civilizations together. If this journey has shifted your view of this pivotal era, we would love to hear your reflections in the comments. And for more explorations into the forgotten pathways that shaped our world, be sure to subscribe.